Welcome, traveller, to the Village Hearth. Come in. The windows are open tonight, all of them, the way they only are at the very height of summer. The evening air drifts in from the gardens and the fields, carrying the smell of growing things settling down for the night. It's been one of those long days that gives a person everything it has and asks for nothing back. And now it's spending the last of itself in long gold light along the tops of the hedges. Settle into it. Get comfortable and let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been keeping themselves. And whenever you're ready, let your eyes close and let yourself drift off to our cozy little village, where the days are slow and everyone has a story to tell. You don't have to have been here before. The village has a way of making a person feel they have. Tonight we're going out past the edge of the village, up into the summer woods, to spend an afternoon with Corin, the village herbalist, as he gathers what he needs to bring a good night's sleep to someone who hasn't had one in a while. He goes out for one small thing, our Corin, and comes home, as he always does, with rather more. So make yourself warm, and let's begin. You know the green by now, and the inn overlooking it, and the lanes with their warm-lit windows, and the little arched bridge over the creek. But if you follow that creek, upstream, away from the houses, the way the water came rather than the way it goes, the cottages thin out, and the lanes go from cobble to dirt to a soft green track, and then there are no lanes at all. Just the woods, the old woods, that were there before the village, and will be there after, going up the shoulder of the hill in no particular hurry, the way old woods do. And on a warm afternoon in high summer, with the morning's work behind him, and the long, bright back half of the day still to spend, that is exactly where Corin was going. Corin kept the little stone house at the very last bend of the lane, the one half swallowed in green, where the garden had long ago stopped agreeing to stay inside its fence. He was the one you went to. Not for the serious things, a broken arm, a deep cut, the things that frighten you in the night. For those the village had other help, and Corin would be the first to send you to it. He was no doctor, and never claimed to be. But for the small things, the long things, the things that wear at a person without ever quite knocking them down, the headache that won't lift, the cough that's outstayed its welcome, the low grey mood that settles over a person in a wet week and won't be reasoned with. For those, you went to Corin. And Corin would look at you a while and ask you a question or two that didn't seem to have much to do with anything, and then go quiet, thinking, and then nod, as though the two of you had agreed on something, and tell you to come back tomorrow. And tomorrow there would be something grown in his own garden, and dried, and made up by his own hands. A little jar, a folded paper of dried something, a cloth bag to drop in the bath, and you'd be better in a day or two, the way you're better after a thing like that. Gradually, and then all at once, and without ever quite being able to say which morning it was that you woke up well. That was Corin. He'd been doing it a long time, long enough that no one could remember the village without him, and he was very good at it, in the way a person gets very good at a thing they have given their whole life to, and never once thought of as work. And the reason he was going up to the woods today was a woman at the far edge of the village, whose mind would not let her sleep. There was nothing wrong with her exactly. That was rather the trouble. She wasn't ill, and she wasn't in pain, and if you'd asked her what the matter was, she'd have struggled to tell you. It was only that when she lay down at night, her mind, instead of going quiet the way a mind is meant to, would get up and start moving about. It would go over the day just gone, and then the day to come, and then a thing she'd said 3 years ago that nobody else remembered, and then back to the day to come again, round and round, busy and tireless, long after the rest of her wanted nothing in the world but to stop. She lay awake. She had been lying awake for some while now, and a person can carry a great deal, but not that. not forever. The not sleeping wears through everything else in the end. So she'd come to Corin, a little embarrassed, sure he'd tell her there was nothing to be done about a thing so small and so silly. And Corin had listened, and had not thought it small or silly at all. He'd asked her a question or two. Did she dream when she did sleep? What did the inside of her head sound like? Late on, was it words or was it pictures? And then, when she'd thought he was finished, he'd asked her one more, an odd one. What could she see from her window at night? And she'd told him, a little thrown, not at all sure what it had to do with not sleeping. The lane, the old tree, a bit of the hill if she leaned. And he'd gone quiet and thoughtful, and then he'd nodded, as though that had settled something, the way he did. Come back tomorrow, he'd said. I'll have something. And to have something, he had to go up to the woods. Now you might wonder, and it would be a fair thing to wonder, why a man with a garden like Corin's should need to go anywhere at all. The garden grew half the healing things the village ever asked for. Surely the makings of a little sleep tea were sitting right there outside his own door. And the truth is, they had been, not so long ago. But the useful things in Corin's garden had a way of not staying in it. They went out, one remedy at a time, all year long. A pinch of this for a cough, a handful of that for an aching back, the calming things especially, which the village always seemed to want more of than any garden could keep up with. He gave them away faster than they grew, and so, often as not, when someone came to him with a real need, he'd go to his own shelves and his own beds, and find he was down to the dregs of the very thing he wanted, and would have to go up the hill for more. He never minded. Going up the hill was half the pleasure of it, but it did mean that a man whose garden overflowed could still, somehow, be forever just out of the one or two things he needed. So up the hill he went. The best of what he wanted grew wild there anyway, and grew best now, in high summer, at exactly this hour. And Corin was not a man to use a tired, dried-up bit of a thing, when a fresh one was a pleasant walk away on a fine afternoon. He took his basket. He took the good knife, the small, curved one, worn thin with sharpening. He took the cloth he wrapped the delicate things in. And because he knew himself, knew he'd be gone well past the middle of the day no matter what he claimed, he wrapped up a bit of lunch and tucked it down the side of the basket, so it would be there when his feet and his stomach finally agreed it was time to sit. And then at last, he told the house he'd not be long, which was a thing he said, and did not at all mean, because Corin was never not long. Going to the woods for one thing and coming back with that one thing was, for Corin, a feat he had managed perhaps twice in his life, and both times by accident. He did not, however, go alone. He never went alone, not really, because the moment the basket came down off its hook, Barley erupted from the direction of the hearthrug with a great deal of enthusiastic noise. Barley was Corin's dog, and Barley was an idiot, and Corin loved him with his whole heart. He was a big, shaggy, good-natured fellow of no particular breeding, and a great deal of particular opinion. The colour of an old straw bale, with feet too big for him, and ears that never quite agreed with each other, and a tail that knocked things off low tables without the slightest remorse. He had two settings. One was asleep, boneless and enormous, in whatever spot was most inconvenient. The other was this, the full body, ears up, tail-going certainty that the best thing that had ever happened was about to happen again, which in Barley's view was any walk at all, anywhere, for any reason, at any time. He did not know or care that they were going up to gather herbs for a sleepless woman. He knew they were going out. That was plenty. That was everything. "Come on then," said Corin entirely unnecessarily, as Barley was already at the gate. In fact, Barley had been at the gate for some time. The moment Corin had reached for the basket, the dog had risen from the hearthrug and stationed himself there in anticipation. because years of experience had taught him that baskets often led to walks, and walks often led to interesting smells, and interesting smells were among life's finest offerings. He bounced once, spun in a complete circle for no reason Corin could determine, then returned to precisely the spot he'd started from, as though this had been a carefully considered course of action. "Good," said Corin. "Excellent preparation." Barley sneezed. His student would have come too, ordinarily. Corin had a student these days, a serious young person who was learning the names and the seasons and the patience of it all, and learning fast, and to whom Corin was slowly handing the long, slow craft the way it had once been handed to him. But the student was away, gone to see family 2 villages over, and Corin found he didn't mind walking up with only the dog. He was fond of company. Corin was fond of nearly everyone, and nearly everyone of him, but the woods were their own company, and had been long before he'd had a student to bring along, and Barley counted for a good deal of company all on his own, most of it underfoot. So up they went, the 2 of them, into the long gold afternoon. The lane out of the village climbed gently, and they took it at the pace of a man and a dog with all the time in the world, which they had, and knew it. The cobbles gave way to packed dirt, and the dirt to a soft green track with grass growing up the middle of it, and the cottages fell away behind, and the hedgerows rose up on either side, high and thick and humming with the warm afternoon. It smelled of dust and dry grass and the green of the verges, and here and there of something flowering in the hedge that Corin greeted by name as he passed without breaking his stride. Barley ranged ahead, and behind, and into the ditch, and out of it again, nose down, reading the whole long history of the lane in smells, looking up every so often to make sure Corin was still coming, which he always was. Bees were busy among the nearby flowers. "Hello, bees," said Corin as he passed. They were far too busy to answer, which he quite understood, and somewhere up in the blue a lark was spilling its song down over the lane. The woods came down to meet the lane at the top of the rise. The old woods, dark and cool and full, standing where the open afternoon ended and something else began. There's a particular feeling to the edge of a wood on a hot day, a kind of invitation. The dim green within, the cool you can almost see, the way the trees seem to lean out a little and offer you their shade. Barley felt it too, and put on a clumsy burst of speed and plunged in ahead with his ears flying, the way he plunged into everything, sure beyond all doubt that it would be wonderful. Corin came on slower. He always did, at the edge. He liked to feel the crossing over, because there is a crossing over when you go from the open into the trees. The light is the first of it. The bright gold of the lane goes soft and broken, coming down through the leaves now in shifting coins that slide over the ground and over your shoulders as the canopy moves. Then the warmth. A few gentle degrees cooler the moment the trees close over you. The heavy gold heat of the afternoon swapped all at once for something dim and green and stirring. Then the sound, and the sound is the strangest of it, because a wood in summer is not silent at all. It only seems so. It's 100 small sounds layered so soft, they come to seem like quiet. The creek somewhere off to the left, talking to itself over stones. The leaves, a great slow continual hush of them overhead. The small high business of birds, going about their afternoon up where you couldn't see them. And under all of it, the deep green hush of the place itself, old and patient, and entirely uninterested in you, which is a restful thing to stand inside of. Corin stopped just within the trees, the way he always did, and stood a moment and breathed it in. Leaf mold, and green growing things, and cool water, and the dark sweet smell of an old wood in the heat. He let the breath out slow, in a long contented sigh, and closed his eyes a moment, and just stood there and let the place soak into him, Not the smells now, nor the cool, but the thing underneath all of that. The feeling he always had here and had never quite found a word for. The sense of the wood as a someone, and not a something, old and unbothered and holy itself, that had stood here long before him, and would stand here long after, and let him walk in it anyway. He stood like that until he'd had his fill of it, and then he opened his eyes and said his hello to the wood, easy and unhurried, the way you greet a place you've known your whole life. And with barley already crashing happily through the undergrowth somewhere ahead, he went in. And then, because Corin was Corin, he immediately became distracted. A patch of wild thyme caught his eye a little further on. "Well," he said, crouching beside it, "I wasn't looking for you." The thyme offered no opinion. It seemed healthy, though, particularly healthy. Healthy enough that Corin felt obliged to admire it for a while. A few minutes later he noticed another plant, then another, then a fern he had no intention of taking home, but which was so handsome it would have been rude not to stop. Several minutes passed. Corin straightened, looked left, looked right, and briefly forgot why he had stopped in the first place. "Oh," he said at last, "the valerian." Barley, who had spent the entire exchange investigating a log, seemed unsurprised. He was a noticer, Corin. That was the heart of the craft, if you wanted to put a heart on it. Not the knowing of what each thing was for, though he knew that too, but the noticing of each thing in the first place, the not walking past. Most people walk through a wood and see a wood, green and more green, a pleasant blur of it. Corin walked through a wood and saw 100 separate living things he knew by name, each one busy being exactly itself, and he could no more walk past them without a word than you could walk past a lane full of neighbors, all out on their doorsteps in the evening. So he greeted things. He couldn't help it. "Look at you," he said, to a great spreading fern unrolling its last fronds in a patch of green light. "Look at you showing off." He didn't pick it. He had no need of it. He just admired it a moment, the way you'd admire a fine hat on a passing stranger, and went on. A little further, a low spread of something silver-leaved catching the light. "Well, aren't you doing well this year?" A few feet on, a cluster of small white flowers nodding on thin stems in the breeze off the creek. "And good afternoon to you. Don't you look fresh?" He crouched and looked at them properly, nose nearly to the petals, and made a small pleased sound, and stood, and went on, and did not pick those either. This was, you understand, how a short errand became a long afternoon. Corin could not pass a wood the way you pass a corridor. Every few steps was a small, glad reunion. He was a sociable man with no people about, and so he was sociable with what there was, and the woods, by long habit, seemed to him about as full of company as the green on a festival day. Barley, for his part, conducted his own quite separate expedition through the same woods, on parallel lines, occasionally intersecting. Where Corin greeted the standing things, Barley investigated the ground ones. A fascinating log, a more fascinating smell beside the log, the ruins of something a fox had left, a patch of cool mud he lay down in, with a grunt of deep contentment, and had to be coaxed out of. Every few minutes he'd reappear at Corin's side, damp and pleased and smelling of whatever he'd found, check in, receive an absent pat, and a "what have you been at, you disgrace," and vanish again about his business. The two of them had walked these woods together so many times that none of this needed arranging. They simply moved through the green on their own errands, each glad the other was there, and met in the middle whenever it suited. But here and there, not often, just here and there, he stopped at a thing and went quieter, and the noticing turned to something more like purpose. There was a low, soft plant growing in the damp near the creek, grey-green and faintly furred, with a smell when he crushed a leaf between his fingers. And he did, and lifted it to his nose, and closed his eyes a moment. That was clean and sharp, and somehow restful all at once, the smell of a thing that quiets you. Corin knew that one. He knew it the way you know an old friend's footstep in the hall. This was the one you smelled before you tasted it, the one that did its work on the part of you that's soothed by a good smell in a warm cup. Half the comfort of a thing like this is in the steam off the top of it, before you've drunk a drop. There you are, he said more softly now. There you are. Yes, you're for her. And he took out the small curved knife and cut, not greedily, never greedily, only what the plant could spare and not feel the loss of, and laid the cut stems careful in the cloth, and wrapped them loose so they'd not bruise, and laid the bundle in the basket with a great deal of care. A little further on, in a dry, sunny break in the trees, there was a second one he wanted, a taller thing with small, pale flowers and a green, resinous scent, the kind of plant that smells of long, warm afternoons and of nothing in the world being the matter. This was the warm one, the one that would make the cup taste like the tail end of a good day, gold and easy and slow. He stood over it a moment. And you, he said, you as well. She'll want you in there, I think. You're the one that tells a person the day's done and they did enough of it. He cut a few stems and wrapped them with the first. Off through the trees, just then, there came a great joyful crashing, and then a splash, and Corin smiled to himself without looking up from his work. Barley had found the creek, or the creek had found Barley. With Barley it was never quite clear which, and there was no sense at all calling him out of it on a day this warm. He'd come back when he was ready. He always did. And sure enough, a few minutes on, the dog reappeared at the edge of the little clearing, soaked clean through, grinning his whole foolish grin, creek water streaming off his belly and his ridiculous ears plastered flat against his head. He came to within exactly an arm's length of the basket. Exactly an arm's length, the precise and careful distance Corin had spent years teaching him. And there he stopped and shook himself from nose to tail in a great spinning fan of water. "Oh, lovely," said Corin, who had turned his back just in time, the way he always managed to. "Thank you for that." Barley wagged, deeply satisfied with his contribution, and went trotting off again about his business, leaving a line of dark, wet paw prints that the warm afternoon set about quietly drying behind him. And then there was the third plant, which was the one that did the real bodily work, though you'd never guess it to look at it. A broad, plain, unshowy leaf, growing in a shaded patch where the ground stayed soft. It had almost no smell at all and not much taste to speak of. What it had was the other thing. When you steeped it, it gave the water a body, a softness, a faint silken weight on the tongue so the tea didn't run thin and watery, but sat in the mouth round and smooth and gentle, like warm milk almost, like something you could feel taking care of you going down. And after you drank it, a little while after, it did the quiet thing it was for. It loosened you. The shoulders you'd been holding up near your ears all day came down, the hands unclenched. A warmth spread out through the limbs and a pleasant heaviness came after it, the body remembering at last that it was tired and allowed to be. That was this one's gift, not to the mind, to the body. Corin gathered a good handful of the broad leaves, because this one he'd used plenty of, and tucked it in with the rest, and now the basket truly began to be a remedy. 3 plants then, and between them they had the whole of it. The first to meet her at the nose, with that clean, restful smell that tells a person, before they've even drunk, that they're being looked after. The second to warm the cup and taste of a day well ended. And the third to reach down past all of that into the tired body itself and gently, kindly let it go. 2 of them for the mind, near enough, and 1 for the body. That was the tea. That was what he'd come for. He had what he'd come for. He could, in principle, have turned around right then and gone home. He did not turn around right then and go home. Of course he didn't. This was Corin. Because the trouble with going up to the woods is that the woods are full of other things, and Corin loved nearly all of them. And once you are already up there, with the basket already over your arm, and the afternoon not nearly over, and the light coming down so prettily through the leaves, well, it seems a waste not to look about a little. And looking about for Corin was never a thing that ended where it began. He found a patch of broad green leaves he liked the look of, not for any ailment, just because they were handsome, and a few would do nicely transplanted along the shady north side of his garden where things struggled, and he was fairly sure, a place they would be happy. He dug 2 up, root and soil and all, with the care of a man lifting a sleeping child, and wrapped the roots and tucked them in the basket beside the remedy. "You'll like it at mine," he told them. "There's a wall keeps the worst of the wind off. You'll see." He found a fern even finer than the one he'd admired earlier, growing where a fallen tree had opened a gap in the canopy, and stood debating with himself a while about whether he had room for a fern, and decided that a man can always find room for a fern, and took it. He found by the creek a sapling, a little whip of a thing, a young tree no taller than his knee, growing too close to its parent to ever have a hope of light, and he looked at it a while and could not bear to leave it there to be shaded out, and so he freed it gently from the ground and added it to the basket too, which was by now becoming a small travelling forest. "You'd not have made it there," he told it, not unkindly. "Too crowded, too dark. You'll thank me." The sapling said nothing, the way saplings do, but Corin felt they understood each other. The basket was, by this point, considerably fuller than a remedy for a sleepless woman strictly required. Corin was aware of this. Corin was always aware of this, at about this point in any trip to the woods, and had long ago made his peace with being the sort of man he was. He'd find some way for the garden to fit it all, and by now, the afternoon had ripened into that long golden stretch when even a man as fond of pottering as Corin begins to feel he's done enough of it, and his feet have an opinion, and the thing to do is sit down. So he found a place to sit down. It was a good place. He knew it of old. A flat mossy shelf of rock beside the creek, where the trees opened just enough to let a warm bar of late sun come slanting through, with the water going by clear and unhurried below, and a fallen log at exactly the right angle to lean a back against. Corin set the basket down careful in the shade where the cut things would stay cool, and lowered himself onto the moss with the small grunt of a man whose knees have walked a good way, and leaned back against the log and let out a long breath, and was still. And Barley, who had seemingly been waiting all his life for someone to sit down, arrived at once and flung himself full length against Corin's side, with the boneless abandon of a creature who has never in his life worried about anything, and sighed enormously, and was also still. From the basket, Corin dug out the lunch he'd packed, which was not much and was exactly enough. A heel of good bread, a wedge of hard cheese gone slightly sweaty in the warmth, an apple from his own tree, and a couple of small early tomatoes from the sunny corner of his garden, still warm from riding all afternoon in the sun-warmed basket, that taste of nothing else on earth but summer. He ate slowly. There was no reason to do otherwise. He tore the bread and ate it with the cheese, and bit the tomatoes whole so they burst warm and sweet, and shared the crust of it with Barley, who received each piece as an undeserved miracle, and was ready, every time, to believe another miracle might be coming. The creek talked over its stones. The bar of sun moved very slowly across the moss. Somewhere a wood pigeon said its 5 soft notes, and paused, and said them again. the laziest sound there is, the very sound of an afternoon with nowhere to be. Corin did not think about much sitting there. That was rather the point of it. He thought about the tomatoes a little, which deserved it. He thought briefly and warmly of the woman who couldn't sleep, and of how the tea would suit her, and let the thought go again. He watched the light on the water. He rested a hand on the warm flank of his dog, and felt it rise and fall. And for a good long while, the man and the dog simply sat by the creek in the gold of the afternoon, full and warm and unhurried, while the woods went on being the woods all around them, and nothing at all was required of anyone. It is one of the better things there is, that. To have done your work, and to sit in a warm place with something you love breathing beside you, and to have nowhere you need to be. Corin knew it for what it was, even as he had it. That's a knack, and not everyone has it. The knowing of a good moment from the inside, while it's still going on, instead of only afterward. Corin had it. He'd had it all his life. After a while, a good long while, he stirred, and finished the last of the apple, and gave the core to Barley, and got himself up off the moss with rather more difficulty than he'd got down onto it, and brushed himself off, and took up the basket again. The afternoon was tilting now toward evening, the light going from gold to a deeper gold, long shadows reaching out across the green. "Come on, you," he said to the dog. "Time to go home, I think." And they started back down, the dog trotting on ahead, his coat very nearly dry again. The long, warm afternoon had seen to the worst of his swim, and only a faint wave left in the fur along his spine, and a low, good smell of creek water remembered it at all. It was on the way down, when he'd more or less resolved to stop gathering, basket heavy on his arm, and the light beginning its long, slow tilt toward evening, that he saw the last thing. It was growing on its own in a little hollow off the path, in a patch of late sun, a single small plant he did not recognize. And that, for Corin, who knew the woods, the way you know the rooms of your own house, was a rare and delightful thing indeed. He crouched down to it. A seedling, really, young, just a few leaves and the very first promise of a bud not yet open. A soft, pale green thing with a shape to its leaves he was almost sure he'd never seen before. Almost sure. He turned a leaf over gently with one finger. He looked at the stem, the set of it, the small, fine hairs along the edge. He breathed near it, carefully, to catch its smell, and caught only green, the plain green smell of a young growing thing that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. "Now then," said Corin, very pleased, very quietly, the way you'd speak to something you didn't want to startle. "What are you?" The seedling did not say. He sat back on his heels and considered it. He could think what it might be. He could think of 3 or 4 things it resembled, a little, from the side, in the right light. But no, not quite. Not any of them. Not really. It was its own thing, and he didn't know it. And there was something wonderful in that, after all these years. A whole life in these woods, and they still had a stranger to introduce him to. He could have left it. It was doing perfectly well where it was. But a seedling that young, alone in a hollow, with the summer turning, and the year after it. Well, Corin was Corin, and he had never in his life been able to leave a young thing to take its chances, when he had a warm wall and good soil and a watering can at home. And besides, he wanted to know what it was. He wanted rather badly and rather happily to find out. So he lifted it, most gently of all, this one, more gently than the fern or the sapling or the handsome leaves, with a good ball of its own earth around the roots so it would hardly know it had moved, and he made a little nest for it in the cloth at the very top of the basket, where nothing would crush it, and he stood, with his small travelling forest, and his remedy, and his mystery, and he went home down the green track in the gold of the early evening, taking his time, because there was no other way Corin knew how to go. The house, when he came to it, was nearly lost in its garden. It was, first and most of all, a working garden, an apothecary's garden, though Corin would never have called it anything so grand. Just the beds and rows and climbing frames of the helpful things, the healing things, the things people came to him for. There was the calming corner, and the corner for coughs, and the low, soft bed of the things that ease an aching body, and the tall, sunny row of the summer flowers, whose petals went into the cheering up jars, and a whole shaded stretch of the green, growing things that quiet a busy mind. Though that stretch was looking thin just now, picked over, half its rows down to stubble, because the village always wanted more of those than any garden could keep. That was the heart of it. That was the garden's real work, and Corin's. And then, threaded all through and among the useful things, spilling past them and over them and out to every edge, was the evidence of a man who had never once managed to come home from a walk with only what he went for. The ferns he hadn't been able to resist, the handsome leaves that did nothing but be handsome, the saplings rescued from under bigger trees, now growing into trees of their own, a whole happy disorder of the merely lovely, crowded in around the useful like guests who'd come for an evening and simply stayed. You could read his whole life in it, if you knew how to look. Every trip up the hill, everything he couldn't leave behind, all of it still here, still growing. The truth was that the garden had not followed a proper plan in years. Corin claimed otherwise. If asked, he would explain that every bed was arranged according to sunlight, moisture, medicinal purpose, seasonal succession, and several other factors that sounded entirely convincing. Visitors generally nodded politely. Then they noticed mint growing beside feverfew, chamomile appearing where onions had once been, and a cheerful flowering thing nobody remembered planting, but which had apparently decided it lived there now. Corin called this a system. Everyone else called it Corin's garden. It was not a large garden. The plot was the same modest plot it had always been, the same low stone wall around it, no bigger than any neighbour's. And yet, however much Corin brought home, and he brought home a great deal, year after year, a basket at a time across a long life of baskets, there was always somehow a bit more room, a bare patch of good soil where a new thing could go, a corner along the wall that wanted filling. He never thought about it. He just planted the next thing, and the garden made space for it, the way it always had. He let himself in at the gate, and the garden breathed its evening smell up at him, warm earth and green and a dozen flowers closing for the night. And he felt, as he always felt coming home, that he had arrived somewhere that was glad to have him. But there was work to do first, before the planting, and Corin did the work first, because the remedy came first. It always came first. He went inside, to the long scrub table by the window where he did his making, and he laid the day's gathering out, and he set the woods. Strangers and the fern and the sapling carefully to one side in a shallow dish of water, to keep until he could plant them, and the mystery seedling he set apart from everything, in its own small place, where he'd not forget it. And then he took up the 3 plants he'd gone for, the grey-green, restful one that met you at the nose, the tall, pale one that tasted of the end of a good day, and the broad, soft leaf that loosened the body. And he set about making the thing that would help a woman sleep. I won't tell you it was complicated, because it wasn't. The best of Corin's makings rarely were. It was a tea in the end, that was all. A tea, the plainest and oldest comfort there is. And because he'd only just picked it, it went into the making green and fresh, not dried. You can make a tea of fresh-cut herbs as easily as dried ones, easier in some ways. You only want a little more of them, and the smell of fresh leaves bruised between the fingers is a greener, livelier thing than dried ever gives you. He stripped the leaves and laid them out, and crushed some to wake the smell up, and a scent rose off the table as he worked. That was the cool creek side and the warm, sunny gap in the trees both at once, the smell of quieting down. He worked without measuring, more or less, a good handful of the restful one, rather more of the soft, broad leaf, a little of the warm one to round it off. His hands knowing the amounts the way hands know a thing they've done 10,000 times. He talked to the plants a little as he went, low, the way he talked to everything, telling them they'd do nicely, that they'd see her right. And when it was done, it was only a small parcel of mingled green, wrapped in a twist of clean cloth, so it would keep its freshness the day or two it needed to. A plain and humble little thing to look at, the sort of thing you'd not look at twice. But there was a way to use it, and the way mattered as much as the leaves. You were meant to take a good pinch and put it in a pot and pour the hot water on, not quite boiling, he'd say, let the kettle settle a moment first. And then you were meant to wait, to stand in your kitchen in the quiet while it steeped, and the steam came up, and the green smell filled the room, to wrap both your hands around the warm cup, to drink it slow, in the last of the evening, before you ever went near your bed. Because the tea worked on a person from two directions at once, and that was the secret of it, if it had a secret. The making and the waiting, and the warm cup held in both hands. That was for the mind. The ritual of it, the stopping, the small ceremony of caring for yourself at the end of a hard day, gave the busy mind something slow and gentle to do and somewhere kind to land. And the leaves themselves, working quietly in the warmth as you drank, that was for the body. The good restful weight of them spreading out through your tired limbs, telling the shoulders to come down and the hands to unclench, and the whole wound-up frame of you that it was allowed, now, finally, to be as tired as it was. Mind from the one end and body from the other, easing toward the middle, toward each other, toward sleep, because that's where sleeplessness lives, in the gap between a mind that won't stop and a body that can't start. Close the gap from both sides, and it has nowhere left to keep you. Corin would never have said the tea made you sleep. Oh, there were things that would, herbs enough in the world that would numb a person, or put them right out whether their mind was done with the day or not. And Corin knew them, and knew where they grew, and left them where they grew. That wasn't sleep, not the kind that mends you. That was just the lights put out from the outside, and it wasn't what she needed. She didn't need to be knocked down past her trouble. She needed to be eased gently toward the far side of it. So the tea didn't make her sleep. It only eased the mind toward it, and eased the body toward it, and brought the two of them gently to the same quiet place at the same time. And once they were both there, sleep found her on its own. That was the whole of it. That was the remedy. He held the little twist of paper a moment when it was done, and thought about her, the woman at the far edge of the village, lying awake these many nights with her tireless mind. And then he set it by the door, ready, so he'd not forget it in the morning. Or, no. He looked at the light. The sun was low and red behind the houses now, the long day finally going down, the first of the dark beginning to gather in under the hedges. But it wasn't late, not really, not in high summer, and she'd not be sleeping anyway. That was the whole trouble. Why make her wait one more night? So Corin took up the little parcel of tea and went out again, just for a short while, down the lane to the far edge of the village, to a certain cottage with a light still on in it. She came to the door with a lamp in her hand, and the look of a person who hadn't expected anyone, and certainly not him, and certainly not this evening. And when she understood that he'd already been, that he'd gone up to the woods that very afternoon for her, and come back and made the thing, and walked it down to her door before the day was even out, Her throat tightened. She had not expected to be taken so seriously, to have braced herself to be gently turned away, and to be met with this instead was more than she quite knew what to do with, and she looked down at the little parcel a moment and steadied herself before she could speak. "You didn't have to come tonight," she said. "It could have kept till morning." "It could have," Corin agreed, "but you'd have had to get through tonight first, and you've had more than enough nights that you've simply had to get through." He put the little parcel into her hand and folded her fingers over it, and he told her how it went. "A good pinch in a pot," he said. "Hot water, not quite boiling. Let the kettle settle a moment first, and then leave it be. Let it steep a good while, longer than you'd think, while you potter about and tidy the last of the day away. Wrap your hands round the cup when you pour it. Drink it slow by the fire if you've one lit, in the quiet before you go up. Not in bed, mind, before bed, while you're still about. And then," he said, "when the cup's empty and you're warm through, and your hands have stopped wanting to do things, then you go up. And don't try to sleep," he said. "Whatever you do, it's the most natural thing in the world, to lie there and reach for it, to set your mind on it like a task that wants doing. Everyone does. But sleep's the one thing that won't be reached for, and never has been by anyone. It's not you, it's the thing itself. So don't reach. You just lie down warm, with the day put away, and you let it come to you. It'll come. It knows the way. You've only to leave the door open for it." She turned the little parcel over in her hands. "It seems a great deal of fuss," she said, "for someone who only can't sleep. People have real troubles." "This is a real trouble," said Corin, and there was no argument in how he said it, only plain fact, gently put. "A person who can't sleep is carrying the heaviest light thing there is. There's no shame in it, and it's no fuss. And if this tea doesn't suit you, then you come back and we'll find one that does, because there's always another way. But I think this'll suit you." He smiled. "It's a good tea. I picked it myself." And she laughed. A small, surprised laugh, the first easy thing her face had done since she opened the door, and held the parcel to her chest like something that mattered a great deal. Because here is the thing, and Corin knew it better than anyone, though he'd never have said it out loud. Some of the medicine was already working, and she hadn't even put the kettle on. The tea would do its part, the real green part, the easing of the mind and the loosening of the body. Corin believed in his leaves, and his leaves were good. But there was another part, and it had started the moment she opened the door. It was the knowing that someone had walked up a hill for her on a warm afternoon and thought about her, specifically her, the particular shape of her particular trouble, and gathered green things and made a small plain thing with his own 2 hands so that she could rest. That eases a person too, in a place no leaf quite reaches, being thought of, being tended, knowing that when she'd finally said the quiet thing out loud, "I can't sleep and I feel foolish for it," someone had heard her and not laughed and gone up the hill. Corin walked home in the last of the light, his basket lighter by one small parcel, and his heart in the good, easy state of a man who has done the thing he is for. Barley walked beside him, tired now, content, leaning the occasional companionable shoulder into Corin's leg as they went. And then there was the garden, and the evening, and the planting. He did it by the soft light of the long summer dusk, when the heat had gone gentle, and the first stars were thinking about coming out, and the garden had settled into its blue evening quiet. He planted the handsome, broad-leaved things along the shady north wall, where he'd promised them they'd be happy, and firmed the soil around them with his hands, and gave them water. He found a place for the fine fern, where it would get the dappled morning light and the afternoon shade it would like. He planted the little sapling, the one that would have been shaded out, that he hadn't been able to leave, out where it would have all the room and all the sky it had been denied. And he stood over it a moment when it was in and told it to go on now and grow. There was nothing stopping it here. And last of all, when everything else was bedded in and watered and settling into its first night in its new home, Corin took up the mystery. He'd found it a pot, a good one, deep and broad, with fresh soil in it, set in a sheltered spot by the door where he'd see it every day, and where the morning sun would find it, but the hard weather wouldn't. He made a hollow in the soil with his fingers, and he set the little seedling into it, ball of earth and all, so gently it surely never knew it had been moved at all. And he drew the soil up around it and firmed it just so, and gave it a careful drink of water, not too much. And then he crouched there a while in the blue dusk, on his heels, looking at it. This small, unknown thing, this stranger the old woods had kept hidden all these years, and finally today, of all the days, decided to show him. "There," he said. "That's better. That's you settled." He didn't know what it was. He still didn't know what it was. He'd have a proper look in the morning, in good light, with his books out, and maybe he'd place it, and maybe he wouldn't. And the truth was, he didn't much mind which. Some things you find out, and some things you just get to watch become themselves. And there's a particular pleasure in the second kind that the knowing ones never quite have. "You'll grow strong," he told it quietly, in the gathering dark. "However you're meant to, whatever you turn out to be, tall or low, or climbing, or sprawling all over the path so I have to mind my step. You'll grow strong, and you'll do it here, where it's safe, and where someone's watching out for you. That's all settled now. That's nothing for you to worry about." The seedling stood in its new pot, very small, very new, holding its few pale leaves up to the last of the light. "I can't wait to meet you," said Corin. He got up slow and stretched the stiffness out of his back and stood a moment in the blue dark of his garden, looking at the small new thing in its pot. And then he went in, to his supper and his lamp-lit kitchen, and his big foolish dog already collapsed across the hearthrug in a state of total ruin, twitching gently after rabbits in his sleep. He left the little plant to its first night in its safe new home, under the coming stars, with the whole crowded green garden breathing around it in the dark. The village settled into the warm dark, the way it does on a summer night. The lamps went out one by one along the lanes. The creek went on talking to itself in the dark, down under the little arched bridge, and away through the woods to wherever it was going. And up the green track, in the last stone house half swallowed in green, the garden grew on quietly in the blue night, the way it always did. A little more of it than there'd been that morning. Room found for one more sapling, and one more fern, and one small unknown thing in a pot by the door, that would, in its own time, become whatever it was going to become. And out at the far edge of the village, in a certain cottage, a woman who had not slept properly in a good long while sat by her open window with both hands around a warm cup, in no hurry, doing nothing, while the green smell of the summer night and the green smell of the tea filled the quiet room together. She drank it slow, and the warmth and the waiting eased her busy mind, and the good green leaves eased her tired body. And by the time the cup was empty, the two of them had come, for once, to the same quiet place together. So when she went up and lay down in the dark, she did not try to sleep. She only let it find her, the way Corin had said it would. Her mind looked about for the urgent thing it had been guarding all these weeks, and found nothing there that wouldn't keep till morning. Her body, warm and loosened and heavy at last, let go of the day, and somewhere between the two of them, with no gap left to hold her up, she slipped over the edge she'd been lying along for so long. She slept. And so by now, traveller, I hope do you. You've had a long day too. Whatever's been going round and round in your own mind, late on, let it slow now, the way hers did. Let your shoulders come down from up around your ears. Let your hands unclench. It's dark, and you're warm, and there's nothing left tonight that needs you. There's no trick to it, and nothing you have to do, and nothing tonight you have to make happen. You couldn't hurry it if you tried, and no one can, so you're allowed to stop trying, and let your mind and your tired body come in their own time. Open the door, and the rest will follow. From the village hearth to wherever you rest. Be well, traveller. Visit the village again soon.